Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar with Blue Hill Research. Today we will be discussing why organizations are choosing in database analytics. Just a little bit of a rundown for today. First off, this webinar will be recorded, and we will be sending that recording out after it is done. Next, we will be taking questions at the end, so feel free to send them in as you have them. There should be a Q&A box up in your console right now. If not, though, there is a menu at the bottom that has a button that says Q&A. That should open that for you, so send them on in as you have them. Lastly, we will be doing a live Looker demo at the end. If that's something that you're interested in, feel free to stick around. If not, no pressure. Alrighty. So, our presenters today are James Haight, who is an analyst at Blue Hill Research, and our very own Talal Assir, who is a senior data analyst here at Looker. Without further ado, I am going to hand it off to Talal.
All right, great. Thanks, Elena. So I thought we'd just start off by giving a quick overview of Looker and Looker's architecture and sort of what makes it a little bit unique. So these are sort of the three pillars here that we have for Looker's data architecture, which is Looker runs 100% in database. It was really built to leverage the modern day database technology. And so, all of the new sort of MPP database technologies that have come out, whether it be Redshift or HP's Vertica, are really built to handle really large amounts of data and built to process that data very quickly. And so, our philosophy is let's keep it in those databases. And the next piece is, rather than being tied to sort of what's existing only in that database, we provide this modeling layer in LookML. So LookML is Looker's own modeling language. And this is the sort of a semantic layer that sits on top of the database and allows you to describe your business logic. And so, you don't have to worry about having a perfect data warehouse schema and having sort of, this everything that you might want to report on or create embedded in the database itself. All of it can be described in a very lightweight fashion within our modeling layer, which is, sort of all version controlled and sort of a very lightweight layer on top of the database. And what that really enables is now taking all of your business logic and exposing it to users who may not have the ability to write their own SQL queries, but really allowing them that self-service exploration of the data, the ability to essentially write, SQL queries in a very safe environment because, those definitions, the relationships in your database and the different transformations that define your business logic were created by your data experts, and they're then exposed sort of contextually to the business users to allow them to do that.
So thanks for that, Talal. I think it makes sense. This is James Haight, by the way, to sort of pick up the baton where you left it off, and I really appreciate you giving that overview. It certainly makes my job a little bit easier, so appreciate it to that end. So let's go ahead and dive in here. The first slide we have here is my bio slide. I don't think anyone wants to dwell on that, so we can go ahead and skip over that. But if anyone has questions for that, feel free to, I'll be sticking around in the Q&A period, and you can connect with me afterwards. But for the purposes of the webinar, I think what I really want to do is lay out the two goals that we want to have, in mind for today, and sort of get everyone on the same page and really try and understand why folks are selecting Looker. And so the two things that we want to do is first, I think it's important to set the table a little bit in terms of the macro trends in the environment. The analytics world, as we all know, is changing. It's just changing so fast. And as a market observer, it's a thrilling time and sometimes frustrating time to be covering the market because if you blink twice, by the time you look at it again, something pretty fundamental has changed, which I think necessitates all of us getting on the same page in terms of understanding what are the trends that actually matter and how they interconnect and how they impact one another. And then more importantly, for the second point of what we're hoping to accomplish today is really, the basis of why everyone's here is understand, why are folks selecting Looker? What sort of, what are the decision points that you should be looking at? And what we're going to do here is add a little bit of the Blue Hill commentary and analysis on top of the industry observations that we have, put both of those things in context together, and really try and, my goal here today is to try and deliver to you guys some insights that you can come back to your job, to your day with, and hopefully have something to take away and move forward with. So that's what we're trying to do here, and I think it makes a lot of sense to just give you a little bit of an overview on Blue Hill Research. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of us before. Perhaps even a few of you guys have been on a couple other webinars that we've done or read some of our reports. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, we're an industry analyst firm, not too dissimilar to a lot of the other folks that you guys are probably imagining. And so we do play in that world with them. But the niche that we've carved out for ourselves, the area of focus that we think provides a lot of value to the folks that we speak with on a regular basis, is really analyzing this decision process, right? Focusing on the investment decision, the why you did it, the how you did it, and what the impact was. And that's really the focal point through which we conduct our research, really the lens to view things through. And there's I'd say about four pillars that really construct this. And of course, what we want to do is understand how these investment decisions are impacting your business, and then also identifying that need, right? We love to understand what's keeping people up at night, what's making them come to work and say, what we're doing isn't quite cutting it anymore. We need to make a change, and we try and here at Blue Hills understand that point as well. And of course, building the business case, crucial to what we do here, and crucial to what we see of successful implementations. In today's world especially, look, no implementation is ever going to be successful unless you get the finance guys, the IT guys, and the line of business team all on the same page, and making that business case to satisfy each of those three perspectives. It's a real challenge, and we like to help folks, navigate that and position it correctly, because, if you're out of alignment, it really hampers your chance of success with an implementation. And finally, of course, how do you select the solution? Why do you do it? What are those decision points? What are those drivers? And ultimately, what impact did it have on your business? So that's a little bit about Blue Hill here, sort of how we view the world, how we think about things, and what we do on a more macro level. But to bring it down one more level into sort of the reason why we're here on the webinar today. At Blue Hill, we like to think of ourselves as a very boots on the ground firm. Of course, we make our market observations, right? Talking to as many people as we can and reading as much as we can and so forth. But what we think is really meaningful is combining those with actually talking very in-depth, very pointed discussions with the folks who are actually in the trenches doing this in their daily basis, and understanding what it means for them, and aggregating this and then distilling the key points, right? So what we want to do here is at Blue Hill, when we hear something that's making a lot of noise, a pretty interesting disruption, an innovation that a lot of people are flocking to, we want to investigate it. We want to understand why. And in this case, looking at in-database analytics and sort of the emergence of these opportunities was something that caught our attention. So we want to dig into it and really understand what's going on behind this. So taking a look at this, using our sort of broad market observations and talking with 4 very specific companies in ways that follow our structured research methodology, very in-depth qualitative interviews, trying to understand what it's like from a very personal as well as tactical and business level perspective, and then distilling those points. So all that is really to say sort of how we go about doing this and why we're here. And as promised, I think it's important to just touch on those macro trends that we outlined. And so no one on this webinar needs me to tell them that data has exploded and then there's more data than ever before and there's velocity and variety and all that stuff. But absolutely essential point. We won't go into it, but also really important to understand is this huge push towards self-service, this idea of decentralizing control, of moving analytics away from the purview of a very few select, highly specialized IT folks and into a broader distribution of whether it be business analysts or just regular line of business people trying to get some data to do their jobs and make better decisions. There's an absolutely huge push for this, and we've seen it in many ways, manifest with a lot of folks on the visualization layer and the data discovery layer. Click or Tableau comes to mind, and folks like Alteryx are really pushing that way on sort of call it the data prep space, if you will. But it's really important to understand this push for it. In contrast with this also need to deliver insights at, people always say the speed of business. The world is moving just so fast. Decisions need to happen so fast. And it's difficult. You really don't have time to deal with a bunch of disparate or decentralized data sources that, maybe if one analyst sits down and does an analysis and another analyst does what they think is the same analysis on what they thought was the same data, they get into the same room and they don't have a discussion, they have an argument, right? They don't really have time for that. So there's these sort of contrasting needs of getting data into more people's hands, but also maintaining this consistency. So understanding where these 2 points push together really goes a long way into taking a look at where the market is today and what people actually need in the marketplace. And the fourth point here is the advent of high-performance database technologies. Talal actually referenced it at the beginning, but it's important to note it's concurrently with all the data and all the analytics technologies, innovations, and everything, the database world has been evolving pretty fast. And this is another space where new innovations seem to be coming out every single day. And just as, say, cloud has been enabling technology for so many other things, this is a very enabling technology for taking analytics to the next level and satisfying the other pain points that sort of result from the first 3 trends. So with that, I think it's worthwhile to say, what does this mean? And I recognize that this is quite abstract here, but we'll break it down in a second. But what does it mean? Right? There's going to be this dichotomy of old and new solutions. And what it really boils down to is this idea of, in this new world where we have new demands, yeah, we can try and retrofit old ideas, old paradigms, and try and do this. But it's not going to work, right? We're going to be giving up massive, performance. We're going to be making concessions in terms of performance or scale, or what we're hoping to do in terms of complexity. And so, really, what we think here at Blue Hill, and what we've seen with a number of people, if you're able to make the shift in thinking, in sort of how you're constructing the way you think about data and analytics, you're able to take advantage of these new technologies at this convergence of trends and see things like fast performance, ability to manage more things at scale and do things at a higher complexity than you previously could. So that's enough of the real high-level abstract picture painting. So to bring it down to the actual study itself and to look at who we analyzed and what we did, as I mentioned, we talked with 4 organizations, and these 3 salient points really came out to us as very definitive of the type of persona that these companies were. And so these companies were, they're born of the web companies. They're sort of new generation, very analytics first. Their bread and butter, right? They're living. The lifeblood of their organization is based online, right? Website traffic, customer usage of their product. All these things are tracked very data centric, very data source, data first. And as a product of this, had these incredible volumes of data that they just really couldn't handle in a lot of ways when they tried it in sort of the traditional method, if you will. And so this is to say not that, if you're an organization that does not have these characteristics, Looker won't provide value. And it's also not to say that if this characterizes your organizations, the opposite is true as well. So this is to say sort of this is the profile of the organizations we talk to, and we'll go a long way in sort of understanding their key pain points, drivers, and the opportunities that they had. So taking a look more specifically at who they were, We had 4 organizations, as I mentioned. Kiva, Simply Business, Snag a Job, and a fantastic B2B SaaS provider that I imagine most of you have heard of, but unfortunately want to remain anonymous for the study, which is totally fine. But hopefully a lot of these companies are very relatable to you guys. So just a little bit of an overview. Kiva, for those of you who don't know, provides loans to entrepreneurs around the world, sort of almost a crowdfunding loan platform. Simply Business is an insurance marketplace over in the UK to help small businesses get insurance. Snag a Job is a job marketplace, and the B2B SaaS provider does exactly what our anonymized name might suggest. And I'm not going to read all of their core challenges, but the hope of putting this slide on here is for you guys to read through it and to identify, maybe self-identify, say, yeah, we had this challenge too. If we were in a classroom and I asked people to raise their hand if they had a difficult homegrown system with a difficult UI, I'm sure we'd get a couple hands raised. And if we said, raise your hand if your existing solution can't handle the workload that you wish it could, can't scale to where you want it to, I'm sure we'd get a few more hands as well. So this is to say, these companies were encountering very typical problems that would be the result of anyone who deals with a large volume of data, especially web-based data. So we take those challenges and, as we analysts love to do, boil things down and wrap it up into sort of 3 categories. As we go through this analysis, what we do in trying to understand why folks choose a solution is first to identify the investment drivers. And when we do this, it became pretty clear that the number 1 investment driver for the folks that we talk to, and as well as the broader marketplace in general, is really comes down to the volumes of data that they had, right? These are people with millions of hits on their website or usage of their product, and every customer, every visitor is leaving a trail of hundreds of thousands of data points, and they need to be able to analyze that to optimize sort of their product offering, their revenue is what it comes down to. And so this created unprecedented volumes of data that they couldn't quite handle. The second is a little bit of a different spin on this, but they really were upset with their inability to leverage past work. If analyst A is doing some work one week and then another analyst a week later is hoping to do something very similar, they felt that there's no reason that analyst B needed to reinvent the wheel every single time they want to do the same or a very similar type of analysis or modeling framework. And so they were very frustrated with that. That was an absolute investment driver for what that made them wake up and say, look, we need to change things. And the third is going back to this idea of decentralization of analytics, allowing self-service access. They knew that if they wanted to be a truly data-driven company, they needed to put data in the hands of folks who are non-technical, right? Because so many decisions are made on the front lines, or so many decisions are made by the people in the business who don't necessarily have the skills to go in, write complex query language and get the exact results that they need in any sort of efficient manner. So they recognized that they needed something that would be able to sort of disseminate these insights or provide greater access to a broader range of their employees. And so you follow the story arc of trying to understand first, what is this investment driver? You then have to understand, okay, now that they decide that they need to change, we need to look at the options of what they could change to. What are they going to invest their hard-earned dollars into to try and make things better? And so the universe of options that we heard consistently is, of course, you see number 3 here is DIY, do it yourself, right? This was an option that all of the companies did consider of varying degrees of seriousness. Of course, there's also the option to just slap on a reporting layer or just slap on a viz layer. They said, look, hey, we have all this existing infrastructure, and maybe the front end's not all that great, so let's just slap on something on the top that's really user-friendly and makes pretty charts. That's absolutely something that they considered as well. And then they also said, okay, maybe we can rip and replace everything and put in a more modernized full-stack BI platform. But the fourth option, and of course they all chose this, and this is why we chose these organizations to study their process of doing this, is saying, well, hold on a second, let's take a step back and, perhaps there's a way to rethink the stack as we know it today, and perhaps there's a chance to to do things a little bit differently with the advent of these new trends and these new technologies that are available. And this is really as we've talked about, the shift to say, hey, let's take an in-database approach to how we're going to do that. And so we'll dig into that in a little bit more as Talal alluded to. But before I go into sort of looking at how the folks that we talked to really described in database analytics and what they perceived as the strengths and advantages. Curious, Talal, if you have any sort of color, as someone who lives and breathes this every day and builds it, anything that you want to add in sort of how folks should be thinking about it, how people should view it, or any sort of color to that end.
Yep, sorry, I was speaking on mute there. Yeah, so sort of along this line as we're mentioning sort of like the traditional ETL processes. It's not to say that there's no there's no ETL involved or there's no data movement involved. Moving to an in-database solution does have that first layer of let me get all my database into a database so I can be in database. Sort of the advantages of having the modeling layer on top of it is it's that traditional ETL process, which is, let me create, sort of these perfect star schemas or my, data marts across my different departments. And you end up with a lot of sort of this very heavy and very redundant data processes. And so that's really one of the problems we're trying to solve. And I think the other piece of it really is we've gotten to a point now, you were mentioning earlier, where we just have so much volume that you have to either compromise the granularity that you want to look at with your data and pre-aggregate everything, bring it up, which brings you back to the same issue of now I've got to go back to the database anyway if I want to get any detail. Or you end up in a scenario where you sort of extracted all this data into a tool that really wasn't meant to hold that much data, and then you would just run into all kinds of performance issues there.
Yeah. So Talal, appreciate that, and part of the reason why I wanted to ask is sort of when we talk to people, there are varying understandings of sort of what it means and what it can mean for their organization. And certainly, I think you gave us a really good idea of the very technical sort of the nitty gritty of what it means. And so we talked to some folks, but also when they were trying to describe to us the business value as they saw it, I think it's worthwhile talking about from a little bit of a higher level too, and that they said, okay, look, what we can do is we can put all of our data into one place that's we don't have to worry about performance capabilities. We don't have to worry about any of that. And we can just slap on a really lightweight, I think you used the term lightweight client on top of it. And, and so they said, look, what we can do is we can push all of the hard work into the database. And I think that's really what resonated with them. We don't have to pull everything and model everything and then put it back and then, re-access. And every time we touch it, there's a cost of time and effort and energy. We can just have the database do all the hard work and we don't really have to worry about it. And that's sort of the main theme that bubbled up in regard to that. So I think with that, it probably makes sense to put a little bit of meat on the bones, if you will. I find this slide pretty helpful in a lot of the ways that we talked about to really put a picture of what the folks actually selected. So you can see Kiva, Simply Business, Snagajob, and the B2B SaaS provider. Each ended up selecting Looker, obviously the point of why we chose them to look at them, but also sort of the supporting infrastructure that they did, and then the data sources that really drove them to this. And what I like about the data sources, a lot of them are very relatable. Everyone seems to have Salesforce.com data. A lot of people have internal systems that they built, and then Google AdWords, depending on what you're doing. And so what they thought of is, hey, like some people liked HP Vertica, some people really liked Amazon Redshift, and certainly there's a large contingent and growing contingent of people who have really been enamored with what AWS is doing. And then they put Looker as sort of the BI and analytics layer. As you can see, this is a little bit of a consolidation of what you would think of as the traditional stack. So it presented a simplified way for which of them to sort of manage and to manage their whole data process, that data value chain. And one thing that I think is actually pretty interesting is you'll see with Snagajob, they actually use a combination of HP Vertica and Hadoop, which I wouldn't say is necessarily very uncommon, but it's not common enough where I think we can take it for granted. And so Snagajob, pretty cool, pretty cutting edge company in terms of what they're doing on the back end. I think we had a great conversation with the CTO, and they're on the edge of just about every single cutting edge technology and project. So it's fascinating to talk with them. But what they're doing is they just had so much data that it was very cost prohibitive for them to put everything into HP Vertica because they just had so much. So they used Hadoop as this gigantic storage. And then what they realized is they were only for their business needed to analyze the last 6 months of data. So they brought in the most recent and important 6 months worth of data into Vertica and use it as a sort of a sliding window through which to run their analysis on, and then Hadoop is essentially a more cost-effective archive, which we thought was a pretty creative way through which to sort of orchestrate everything. And so I wanted to highlight that as a little bit additional context and color for you guys. So the next point here is we talked about sort of what people thought of was really important about the in-database approach. But there's also a couple other things unique to Looker that were called out to us in the course of the study, and then, of course, over our other market observations. So we're not going to go rehash everything about the in-database approach because I think we covered that, and Talal, you actually stole my thunder a little bit on the ETL bit. So we'll leave that there as the bullet points. But looking at Looker specifically, look, lightweight, I like that term a lot, but really it just means that if you're not doing all the heavy work in the client itself, you're able to push it down. You get something that can be much more flexible, much more agile, a lot less unwieldy, and causes less problems. So people really like that. And then LookML, as Talal, you mentioned it right at the beginning, but turned out to be a pretty big differentiator for folks. They love this idea of having something, a much more intuitive modeling language that they could share with other folks via GitHub or Slack or whatever your sharing service of choice would be. And this is a huge differentiator for folks that they really like to, and we'll get into that a little bit on the next slide. And then the metadata modeling, which Talal talked about as well, which I'm sure he can give you a deeper detailed dive if anyone wants to get into that during the Q&A period. So in an effort to just really bring this full circle to provide a little bit more color, like I said before, meat on the bones, I want to call out specifically the case of the B2B SaaS provider. They are a publicly traded company, recently public, awesome company, absolutely have killed it in the last 5 or so years. And as a result, they have a very, very robust sales machine, and they also, because they're a SaaS company, have tremendous amounts of customer usage data. So this means that their sales force is overwhelmed, and their CRM is just overwhelmed with a wealth of information that they can't mine, they can't optimize, they can't really make the best decisions possible because they don't have enough insight into it or didn't have enough insight into it. And at the same time, they just had such streams of information about their customers and how they're using their products that they just couldn't handle all of the requests of how to optimize and how to incrementally improve. So it was a really interesting sort of double-edged sword that they were dealing with, and they were hamstrung in a couple ways. And the first is that they had tried a bunch of BI solutions, a bunch of analytics solutions, and they got really low adoption. And certainly, for any implementation to be successful, a critical mass of people need to be using it, or else really there's no value in it. So they had struggles getting to that, and then they also had an engineering team that was overwhelmed. They were a centralized team trying to do anything and everything to help improve the business, and they just absolutely could not get out of trying to go department by department, trying to fix every little thing or to optimize every workflow because there's just one team of them trying to support this huge publicly traded company now. And so what they did is they were really bought into this idea of centralizing everything on Redshift. And so I think that's an important point. But the one that really wanted to highlight is they want to get more insight and efficiency. And the way that they wanted to do this was saying, is there a way to take all this work that's traditionally been on our central engineering team and give it to the business analyst? Is there a way we can get sales analysts to run analytics for sales-related activities? Is there a way we can get marketing to do marketing? Is there a way for us to get ops to do ops? And to really have the people who are in the day-to-day do things that improve their own job function and the things that they care about the most, that they're really passionate about and they know exactly how to fix, and then leave the engineering team to do more high-value added work and to get away from what they viewed as a lot of grunt work, right? When the engineering team went into the marketing department to try and build some views and models for them, they saw it as just a task, right? But the marketing department saw it as, making their own jobs better. So they cared about it a lot more. And they recognized Looker as a tool to do this. And one of the key elements to it was, of course, was LookML, because what it presented an opportunity to do was a very accessible way for their non-technical or not as technical data analysts in the department, so the sales analytics, the sales analysts, the ops analysts, to leverage the work of one another by sharing their LookML codes just via Slack even and GitHub. And so that was a huge win for them. And on the next slide, I actually have a quote that I thought summed up this interaction in a pretty succinct way. So the quote's to say, this is from their senior business intelligence analyst, and I think this title actually undersells him a little bit more. When we talked to him, the scope of what he was doing was actually pretty tremendous, and I wouldn't be surprised if his title is actually a little bit higher ranking sounding at the moment. But look, he basically said, it's hard to hire engineers, and anytime that you can shift the work from the engineers to the analysts, it's a win, right? When they can use LookML and just share and leverage and not have to reinvent the wheel every single time they want to do something, and it lets their lets their engineering team do what they do best, do what they care about, provide a lot of value, while it lets the ops analysts do what they need to do in a better way. So it sort of decentralizes, and this is a big win for them. It meant a lot. So I thought that was a good way to characterize sort of, their experience with what happened when they went with Looker. So part of, as I mentioned, what we do here at Blue Hill, we look at the decision-making process and, why someone selected a solution is all well and good, but if you don't understand what actually happened after they did, then, it doesn't really tell the complete story. So we, of course, wanted to analyze what was the business impact of these four organizations when they invested in Looker. What happened 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, after they did it, what was the actual impact? And I think there's two buckets and two ways to view this. Depending on what side of the equation you're on, you'll probably have different levels of appreciation for each one. But there's sort of this efficiency idea, this IT side, and then there's sort of that more business-facing, customer-facing side of increasing your revenue. And on the IT side, we talked about it, but there's an opportunity, and they saw this as a way to sort of consolidate the stack, if you will, centralizing their data in one spot, rethinking their infrastructure, pushing the heavy lifting to the infrastructure, and then, of course, with LookML, this opportunity to write once and deploy in a one-to-many fashion, huge efficiency gains that each of the organizations recognized, spoke to us about, we thought was really valuable. And then on the revenue enhancement side, this is sort of, what happens when you put this into practice? What was the net outcome here? And so many of these companies, they are, the data that they're analyzing is really the lifeblood of their business. And so when they have hundreds or thousands or millions of people coming to their website or using their products, their ability to analyze this data and to build their user interface, to build their work, the customer flow experience through their website, to optimize that meant more conversions. It meant more customers. It meant happier customers. It meant more dollars in their it meant, a higher revenue. It meant a lot of things that were very important to their business. And then, of course, so we talked about this. In some ways, would be measured as lead conversion. In some, it's more just product improvements that led to more sales down the road. But I think also I put this in here, right, using Looker as a selling tool, and I'll cover this in the next slide a little bit more. But we mentioned that people chose it because there's an opportunity to put this in the hands of non-technical people, and one of these companies actually put Looker in the hands of their entire sales team, and I'll cover it on the next slide here. But the sales team, what they did was they took Looker and they were able to model right in front of their clients live, whether on the road or over the phone with WebEx, exactly what they could expect to receive and why in a very data-driven way. And so I think that speaks to the power of being able to sort of decentralize the access to a number of non-traditional analytics users. And then, of course, a couple other tangible indicators of value, right? Taking that sort of more abstract, saying, hey, it impacted efficiency, and putting a number on it. The B2B SaaS company, as I mentioned, huge machine, lots of reporting from Salesforce. And one of the things that they regularly do, they do contest and performance reporting. A simple way to read this would just be sort of evaluating folks for their bonuses. And they estimated it took them hundreds of man hours a month. And in the first month, they were able to shrink this process by 130 man hours. So if you think about it, that's a couple people working full time for a week. So I think that's a pretty good indicator of the efficiency gains that you can get. And then, of course, adoption levels, really important to success. You got to get that critical mass of people on the tool in order to earn trust in it, in order for it to become a system of record, in order for it to actually provide value. And we saw one of the organizations, 200 plus active users in the first couple months. We thought that was a pretty good benchmark. Really, a high watermark actually, indicates a lot of success. And then 100% executive adoption at a couple of the organizations that deployed it to their executive team. And I think that just speaks to this ability of, if you want to say you're a data-driven company and you want to do that and you want to walk the walk, you got to have your executive team on the solution. And so to have something that gets adoption at that level, really impactful, really speaks volumes. So with that sort of in wrapping up the portion of slides that I have here, just taking a look, really, a lot of this is a little bit of recap here, but this is a classic analyst fashion, right? This is the tell them what you told them slide. But I think there's a real opportunity to unite the core business stakeholders, right? There's the business folks, the IT folks, the finance folks. Getting them all on the same page, I think, is a good way of sort of articulating. In order to do that, actually, you have to articulate the value. Really important to do, and in doing so, right, you got to understand what are the key drivers, and the key drivers that we saw, right, of course, unprecedented data volumes that was really forcing them to rethink how they were doing things. And then, of course, what happens if we centralize our data? What happens when we shorten the stack? What happens when we make things simpler, more lightweight, more flexible, more agile, and we're able to distribute it to a broader portion of people? And I think that's where the true value comes in. Once you're able to distribute the ability to have the power of data to make your decisions better to a broader base of people throughout the organization, I think that's where the real value comes through. And that's what we saw with the organizations that we spoke to. So with that, I think that sums up sort of my portion of the slides, and I'll toss it back over to the Looker team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James. That was great. So we've been getting actually a lot of questions. So the first one I'm going to throw out is actually going to go to Talal. So the question is, if Looker runs in database, how much work is needed to consolidate the data? And how do you define relationships between disparate sources that have been consolidated into a single database?
That's a great question. And so, we talk a lot about, changing the whole, traditional ETL method. I think it's really important to talk about, the fact that we are still an in-database solution, and this whole idea and this sort of philosophy of running in database does require that consolidation effort. Now, the way that we've sort of enabled and tried to create a more agile environment is that it's no longer really an ETL process as much as it's sort of an ELT, if you will, in the sense that you're really just it really just becomes sort of an extract and load from transactional sources, disparate, other maybe SaaS products, pulling the data out of there and sort of doing almost a raw dump into these scalable MPP databases. And then that T portion, that transformation, it sort of happens at query time. And so it becomes sort of a schema on read methodology where I'm not spending a ton of time, trying to create this perfect data model where everything is perfectly aligned. And this is especially important. One of the companies that we talked about was that B2B SaaS provider, where they were actually, pulling their Salesforce data. And Salesforce is a great example of an ever-changing, data source. You just can add so many different fields and it just changes almost on a daily basis. And if you're sort of relying on fitting that into a traditional physical database schema, you're going to spend a lot of time, making changes. And by the time you completed changes, there's going to be more changes to be made. The method that we're talking about here is more of a, let me just do a raw dump of all my data, from that source in its raw form, and then worry on the semantic layer about what I want to expose, how I want to expose it, and what transformations I want to apply at query time. And that just makes for much more agile development and much quicker iterations on that process.
Great. I hope that answered your question. So our next question is, what about BigQuery as a database infrastructure and as an alternative to Vertica or Redshift? Any thoughts?
Sure. So we've actually had, yeah, sure. So we've actually had a pretty good amount of success with BigQuery. They are also a very fast, extremely scalable solution. So yeah, it's sort of just, BigQuery is just sort of another example of these new, very powerful MPP database platforms. Looker really only requires to be able to speak SQL. And so things like BigQuery or other new sort of evolving technologies like Spark SQL and Hive and Impala, these are all examples of, those new scalable database infrastructures that are meant to hold sort of vast amounts of data.
Great. So I'm going to actually point this next question at James. How does one forward a culture of data management or using the right data, and how can Looker help? Data anxiety or hoarding seems to be very common in my experience, where decision makers want to know everything. Paralysis by analysis, if you will. James, any thoughts on that?
If there was an easy answer to it, maybe that's a tough question. A whole lot there. That's something we spent a lot of time thinking about. I don't know if I could give a succinct enough answer in say 30 seconds. If you want to give them my email, let's chat via email. We can talk about that, because that might be a longer conversation than what we might have here for the Q&A period. So yeah, forward over the email. We'll set up a chance to call.
Great. Any thoughts, Talal? Yeah,
it certainly is a loaded question. The general method, and something that we really try to enable is, we really feel, I think, here that we're selling more of a culture than a product. It is sort of that idea of, when I have a question, data should be the first thing I go to get the answer to that question. And how do I best enable my users to do that? How do I enable my marketing team and my sales team to be able to use data to use that question? And I think the way that we've approached it is not necessarily trying to force them into a new product or whatever, but rather, being able to take this data model that you've created within Looker and embed it using either our API or using sort of embedded iframes or something, putting it into an environment that's already part of their day-to-day workflow. One of the customers we were talking about today, took Looker charts and they embedded them into Salesforce. And so rather than forcing them into Looker and saying, "Oh, go answer your questions in Looker," it's sort of part of what they were already doing. And that sort of starts it. And you'd be amazed where, you give them a little peek of data, a little taste of it, how much more, it sort of grows very organically from there, because one question will always lead to another. And really, you're providing them the ability to do that. So, I would say you don't want to sort of throw the kitchen sink from day one, but it is sort of a phased approach where, you sort of give them a little taste of the data and then naturally that starts to grow organically as people become more and more data curious.
Yeah, this is James. The only thing I would add to that is I think what we've seen that works very well for organizations that are successful, a very iterative approach, sort of that lean startup methodology, right? Starting with very small wins and working your way up from there is what we've seen be extremely successful. And then in larger organizations, and what I mean by that is actually just really any organization with probably more than, say, 50 people. So actually a center of excellence where you're putting forth best practices and understanding what's working for other people and enabling that conversation throughout the organization to make sure that there's a flow of best practices and not just having silos of that as well. We find that to be very common amongst organizations that are successful. So I would say that would be a little bit of an added cherry on top to that as well.
Great. So the next question kind of goes back to the ETL question. So the thought is that non-technical users can't really move easily through so much data. So what do you expose and what do you give them, and how do you make that ETL make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So this sort of goes to a little bit of what we were talking about before, partly, exposing it in an environment that's already friendly to them. But also what I'd add on top of that is, if you look back at the traditional model of having sort of these data marts and having these sort of limited data sets that are only relevant to certain departments, let's say, and exposing only that data to them, we've tried to take sort of the advantages of that, but again, put that in the semantic layer. And so while you may have all of your raw level detail in your database, within the modeling layer, you get to sort of determine and create these very catered experiences for the user in terms of what fields do I actually want to expose to them? What data do they need? What's relevant to them? What level of granularity do I need to give them? And sort of all of those decisions can be made on the semantic layer, which again enables you to make quick changes if you decide, all right, well, now they're asking for a little bit more and a little bit more. And that's actually what we tend to recommend, when we've got a new customer is, when I'm going from zero data, I don't want to go from zero data to all the data in one day. So typically we say, start with the bare minimum, start with what exactly they want. And then as they sort of get a taste of that, they'll start to ask more, and you can sort of naturally grow that out and start exposing a little bit more and more.
Perfect. So our next questions, I'm actually going to combine a couple. Maybe Talal, you could speak to this, kind of what Looker looks like against Tableau, and then after that, what it is against Burst.
Sure. So I think Tableau, in many senses, is sort of like it's become sort of the industry standard in terms of a visualization tool. The way that we see it, Tableau is really Tableau and Looker are really solving different problems. Tableau has a really great library of visualizations. It's got that great sort of front end to the data. The issue that we're trying to solve is more on, well, how do I get to, that next level of questioning? So the way that I always talk about it is Tableau, if you look at a report or a dashboard, and you're designing it in a visualization tool like Tableau, that report or that dashboard is sort of the endpoint. It's meant to sort of answer all the questions. The issue comes, all right, well, what if I see it part of my report and I have a next level question? The way that Looker sees it is, that dashboard is really your entry point into the data. That's only my beginning. And because I have that direct database access, I can start off at a high level dashboard or report, but I can now drill into that and really start asking more questions rather than, creating this sort of queuing system where, all right, I have another question. Let me go back to the data team, once I get the answer to that one, and it's become sort of this endless cycle. So that's sort of for the visualization tools like Tableau. The other thing I'd add is that the whole single source of truth issue, where Tableau you run into the same problems where you would with Excel, where you've got data siloed now into different Tableau workbooks where everyone can start creating their own metrics. And then, as James was mentioning earlier, you come into a meeting and you start having an argument over, whose data is more right, rather than, let's talk about this data and we know it's right because it's all coming from the same source. The burst model is a little bit different. Burst does sort of take that let's suck in all the data approach. So where they're strong is if I have a bunch of different data sources and I don't want to worry about moving them into a SQL database. The issue is that it's extremely developer intensive. You need a very technical team to be able to manage that interface. And you also run into the limitations of, I can't fit this much data into a BI tool because that's not what BI tools were designed to do. That's what databases like Redshift and Vertica were designed to do. And so that's sort of the other end of it is I've again got to limit what I can bring into that tool, and I have to make those decisions up front.
Awesome. Thank you, Talal. So the next question, saving man hours is a great sell, but it seems there are some organizations that opportunity cost is not factored into technology investments. How does one make that a higher priority for decision makers? James, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is, we spent a lot of time on this, and I think the very first thing that you need to do is, for some people, opportunity cost is a very accessible, principle to think about. But I think the absolute first thing you got to do is sort of tie the man hours to a dollar amount, and then compare it to a dollar amount of what would have happened if these man hours were spent on some other value-adding activity. So for those of you guys who are familiar with the IRR principle, right, this internal rate of return, what you want to do is try and figure out this internal rate of return of your man hours, and say, if we're on the hamster wheel doing this sort of sunk cost project, this is how much time we didn't spend doing something that was going to add value back to the organization. So comparing that stark contrast, so step one would be putting a dollar amount on your time. Step two would be trying to figure out what that ideal internal rate of return on your man hours would be. And then step three would be showing the contrast between where you'd ideally like to be and where you are if you're doing this project as sort of a sunk cost. And then so hopefully that contrast, it'll end up being a big number, and hopefully that'll sort of spark people to think about it in a different way, to really say, okay, look, there is a cost to everyone's time, and we can't just think about it in the way we have been. So I would recommend that as a starting point.
Great.
Yeah, and the thing that the only thing I would add to that, man hours is definitely a very important metric. But the other piece of it is, if we truly want to be a data-driven organization, the data has got to be ready when we need the data. And if I have a problem come up, or if there's a situation where I need data and I've got to wait weeks or months before I can actually restructure whatever I need to restructure in order to build that the infrastructure to provide that data, then likely by the time I get it, I don't need it anymore, and the problem's changed, and you end up really not being able to be data driven because by the time you get to the data, there's no problem anymore, or the problem's passed.
Perfect. All right. Let's see. So a little bit of question about data cleaning. When does that happen in Looker? Is it during querying, or does it happen in a separate process on the database before using Looker? Talal?
Sure. So I'd say it's sort of a bit of a trade-off. It's all about how you want to design. Typically what we see is, people will start off by just doing a completely raw dump. And then if there are sort of non-changing rules that they know are going to need a cleanup, if there are test records, or if there's just dirty data that you can sort of identify up front, you could then take that, but you can identify those, pretty quickly, and then take those back and build them into the process that you're getting the data into the database. And then, the other alternative is you could also execute it at query time. So if you know all the rules that you need to have to clean up that data, that can be executed at query time. So it's sort of a matter of, how dirty are we talking, and where do you want to spend that time? Do you want to take the hit at the query level, or do you want to just identify those up front and then be able to move it back into the ETL process?
Great. Let's see. So we did have one more question about unstructured data. So can Looker be used with unstructured data? For example, MongoDB.
That's a good question. So LookML's fundamental approach is LookML is essentially an abstraction of SQL, and so Looker does need to be able to speak SQL to the database. So we would work with unstructured data in the sense of you can have JSON files in Hadoop, or even actually in MongoDB, or in something like a Snowflake database, but you would be required to put some kind of SQL engine on top of that. So for example, Spark SQL could sit on top of MongoDB and provide that SQL interface. And then Snowflake and Impala and Hive and those sort of technologies would sort of take care of that SQL translation from the unstructured data into what you need it to be. So no direct native connection to MongoDB, but you would be able to get to those MongoDB files through some kind of SQL interface with Looker.
Perfect. So we have a couple more questions here, but I do want to give Talal time to just show a quick demo of Looker. So if we haven't answered your questions, we will. We have all of your contact information, so we will send you the answers that you are looking for. Talal, would you like to set up a demo? If this is it for you and you're checking out from us for today, thank you so much for attending. This webinar will be posted on looker.com tomorrow, and I will also send you all the recorded file of it. Talal?
Great, thanks. Let me just get my screen shared here. All right, are you able to see that?
Not yet. It is buffering, and we're good.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to give a very quick overview of Looker, and sort of just up front, if you are interested in having a conversation or doing a much deeper dive into the Looker demo, we'd be happy to set up individual meetings. If you reach out to us, we'd be happy to set that up. So I'll just do sort of a 30,000-foot overview here of Looker. So right now we're connected to our demo environment. One of the key things to notice is that everything is web-based. So everything's accessed through your browser. There's no desktop client. There's not even a browser plugin. We've taken sort of this web server approach, and we've tried to build everything in HTML5, so it renders very nicely across different screen sizes, different device types, etc. So we're looking right now at just sort of this home page that has our spaces, a few different dashboards that we've built out, etc. And we can take a look at one of these here. I'll jump into one of our Salesforce dashboards and open that up in another tab. And right now we're actually connected to a Redshift database where we've imported, a Salesforce. This is obviously a fictitious business, but we've imported a Salesforce account into a Redshift database, essentially. So all the data lives there. And here we've got sort of a high-level executive summary dashboard with examples of different visualization types. The dashboards are very interactive, and so you can sort of toggle different fields on and off, see the values underlying if you overlay across any of the elements here. A bunch of different visualization options that we have. Something else that you can do, because it's all in that HTML5 link, you can sort of create a nice workflow for users. So sort of linking between dashboards or linking either within Looker or outside of Looker contextually based on whatever you're looking at. So in that case, I've drilled from one dashboard into another and applied this mid-market filter where I'm now specifically looking at my mid-market business segment. I could go ahead and change this and say, like, let me look at the enterprise instead, and rerun that query and see all those different elements are listening to that filter. Now, one thing that's really important to note here is, even though we're looking right now at summary level metrics, we still do have that direct database connection. And the reason that's important is, if I'm looking at my chart here and I see, a spike or a dip in one of my chart elements, I can drill into that point. If I want to see these 167 opportunities, for example, I can drill into that point and now see the row level detail that's sitting behind that spike or that dip. So that drill down has brought me into this Explore section. And this is where you have all of these different fields that you've incorporated, into your business model so that you can sort of start to ask questions, either from a drill down. I can start to add more elements to this. So for example, if I want to also see, when the opportunity was created, let's say what the probability was, what the stage name of the opportunity is, I can sort of start to add these fields and rerun the query. And what Looker is actually doing as I'm creating that or sort of toggling these fields on and off is Looker is actually dynamically writing the SQL based on what fields I've selected. So you can see, my new fields are now here, and I can start to build off of those. So if we look at, sort of a pretty simple query here, I'm going to go ahead and clear the screen. I can do something like, let me look at all of my opportunities that have been closed in the last, 90 days. Go ahead and run that query. I want to filter down to, what's actually closed. So I can add this is closed, dimension to my query and see, how many opportunities have we actually closed in the last 90 days? And let me visualize that query, through this tab here. So a bunch of different options in terms of visualizations and creating different visualization types. Another big piece of this is actually the collaboration aspect. And so being able to take this same, ability, the same sort of consolidated data model, but share it outside of Looker as well. So I can, download raw data into, whether it be CSV, text, Excel. I can schedule reports to run on an interval or on an alert basis. And then you can also take any one of these visualizations and embed them, either in an iframe in a third-party application or an entire dashboard on an application. Now, one important thing to note is that, if I'm looking at my big list of fields here, some of these fields are columns that essentially exist in the database. They're directly just pointing to a column in the database. But others are fields that I've defined in Looker. And so they actually don't exist in the database, but I've defined them in Looker based on my own business logic. And to the business user, it essentially looks like any other field. But as you select those fields, Looker is actually doing these, SQL transformations to give you what those definitions are. So I think actually that probably covers, I know we're running out of time here, that probably covers a very high level of the SQL interface, or the Looker interface rather. If you'd like to see sort of a deeper dive on the LookML and the modeling layer and sort of the engine that powers all of this, we'd love to set up, a separate meeting and get into it with you guys on that meeting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Talal, and thank you everybody for attending today. As I again mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording, and we will be following up with any questions that we were unable to answer during the Q&A period. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their day, and thank you again for attending.